This program is proudly sponsored by Nwiki Carbone, personal injury lawyers. Good evening and welcome to Conflict of Interest. This is Greg Barnes, I'm Peter Farris, and the topic tonight is the eternal one of the death penalty. Our guest in the second segment will be Noel McNamara from the Victims Against Crime Association. Well, do you support the death penalty or not, Greg? A yes or no answer would be fine.
No.
Not in any circumstances?
Under no circumstances.
German war criminals?
Under no circumstances.
Bali Bombers?
Under no circumstances.
I see. Why is that?
Well, all you do is merely essentially move into their territory. That is, treat life as something that you can cavalierly do away with. I mean, we don't, for example, rape the rapist, or we don't beat up the assailant. We send them to jail. We send them to jail for long periods of time in some cases. The death penalty is not a deterrent. It's never been shown to be a deterrent. In fact, the trend around the world now is to move away from the death penalty. There were less executions in the US last year than any time in the last 15 years. There are some states in the US which are staying executions because of the problem, one of the major problems with the death penalty, which is that you get the wrong person gets executed, and of course you can't bring them back.
Oh yes, but that's never happened in Australia.
But it happens. It happens.
Well, it's never happened in Australia.
But that doesn't mean it wouldn't happen in Australia.
It's
happened in the
I'm in favour
US.
of the death penalty, obviously, in cases which are open and shut, where there's no debate. For example, the Bali Bombers, who are proud to admit their guilt.
But why would you see in the case of the Bali Bombers? They want to be executed. You know, execution to them gives them martyrdom.
I don't think they do want to be
executed.
executed.
Oh no, they do. They want to be. They want to be executed. They don't want a life in
They've said
prison.
They've said that from day one. But all they've done is appeal, which is not really the sign of someone who wants to be executed. I don't think it matters whether they want to be executed.
But I think the point is, you know, why do we execute people?
We execute people because that's historically, and this is over many, many centuries, what the public thinks is the appropriate penalty.
Well, the public used to think, in many cases that, you know, public floggings are okay too. The public still thinks that in some countries. Do we do that in Australia?
The public in Australia, the last figures I saw, there was a majority in favour of the death penalty in some instances.
But that's always, people are always going to say, well, in some instances, you know, if it's terrorism, for example, they're going to say, well, you might execute people. I don't support that, but people will often say that.
For my part, I think that the death penalty should be available, not mandatory, but available for terrorist murders, child murders, sex murders, so rape and murder, and murder of police.
Now, what about in cases, how do you get around the problem of convictions being wrongful convictions, which is a very common problem in the US?
Well, the US has got as you know, quite a different judicial system. Here, I think the representation of people is of far higher quality than it is in the United States.
But you can't rule it out that the courts could get it wrong. Well, the system could get it wrong.
I think before any government said yes, hang them, the government would have to review the facts as well and be satisfied that the evidence is there.
But why?
You wouldn't execute people in borderline cases.
But what about the case, for example, there's the case in Western Australia of that fellow Mallard, who went to jail for some period of time as a result of what was a gruesome murder, I think, of a woman in a shop. Everybody was convinced that Mallard was guilty, except a few people who stood by him. In the end, after the government had reviewed the case, threw it out, it then finally got to the point where people said, hang on, he's not guilty. Now, he would have been hanged.
No, he wouldn't have. There are some...
Well, he could have been hanged. That was brutal... In that case, it was a brutal murder. A lot of people would have said, he should be hanged.
There are a lot of murder cases where there's a dispute about them, and you wouldn't hang.
So
a
only,
person.
you're saying you would only hang people if there was no dispute.
Yes,
Only
I mean,
if people
for example,
pleaded guilty.
if someone pleaded guilty.
But you've got to ask you this:
If there
does it deter crime?
Well, look at who was the guy that shot the solicitor in the street.
Yeah, but does it deter
But
crime?
who was that? What was his name?
Well, the solicitor's name was Robinson, I think.
Yeah, the criminal.
I can't remember his name.
Yeah.
But does it deter?
Okay, well,
does it
there's no
deter-
doubt that he did it, is
But
there?
does it deter?
Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, but
He's pleaded guilty, and there was
no, he pleaded not guilty. He pleaded not guilty. There was a jury trial.
No,
in
he
that
ple-
particular, yeah,
no,
no,
no.
there was a jury trial
He
in that
pleaded
particular
guilty to
case.
murder.
No, he pleaded not guilty. There was a jury trial.
No, you're wrong.
He was represented by the same firm that I represented.
No, you're wrong. Because he only got the discount, the 35 years minimum, because he pleaded guilty.
Well, no,
That's why he got it.
there was a jury trial. But coming back to the broader point, is it a deterrent? No.
All right, well, let's deal with mistake, which is what you've raised first. I think
Is it a deterrent?
I think you'd only apply the death penalty in cases which you were satisfied weren't just beyond reasonable doubt, but were absolutely certain.
And who decides that?
Well, the executive, the government would have to
And
decide that.
what if the government's attempted then to play around with that for political
well,
purposes,
we
like
elect
Henry Bolte was?
Well, they shouldn't, and we elect our governments.
but governments do that. We know
Well,
that.
we elect them, and we expect them to do their job. So we have
But
that.
governments, but you can't rule out the
Well, if a
possibility
person
that
pleads
governments-
guilty and there's overwhelming evidence, then I don't have a problem with that.
Let's say that a person pleads guilty on the basis of.
Well, why
hang
should
on,
people
just-
be in
hang on.
jail then?
Well, if let's say a person pleads guilty, it's later found that the confession wasn't voluntary, as for example in the case of the Birmingham Six and the Guildford Four in England.
well, that's I think that's a different issue.
Well, hang on, but people said, oh, they were guilty.
Yeah,
They were guilty
but
of
they
terrorist
weren't-
crimes.
but they weren't executed.
But they would have been executed. You said people
No,
to be
I
executed
said
for
it's not
terrorism.
mandatory. I said it's what you do is when
But why
when
do
you're
you-
satisfied
why
it's
do
an
you
open
want
and
it?
shut
Why do you
case.
want it? Why do you want the death penalty?
So that
What does it
answers the
achieve?
question of mistake. I think it achieves the level of punishment that the community expects. I think when you get a horrible crime completely without reason. I mean, I can remember where I think a criminal shot a prostitute, and then because her 6-year-old son was in the back seat, saw it, shot and killed the boy as well.
Lock him up forever.
Well,
The deprivation of liberty is the ultimate sanction, surely.
what the worst?
The worst sanction is
Worse
the
than the
deprivation
death
of
penalty.
liberty. Absolutely,
All right,
absolutely.
well, that means I'm more merciful than you. I would give him the second worst punishment, which is the death
goodness
penalty.
sake. The death
well, that's
penalty,
what you're saying,
you know the thing about the death penalty, and I'll be interested to get Noel McNamara's views
It's
on
more
this.
merciful, isn't it?
It is not a deterrent. I don't think there's
Well-
anyone who seriously suggests around the world now, even its
I
protagonists
think it's a
suggest it's a
deterrent.
deterrent.
I think it's a
but
deterrent.
the evidence in the US suggests
No,
that it's not a
that's
deterrent
not-
at all.
that's not
It is
evidence.
not a deterrent at all.
The evidence doesn't...
It's never deterred people.
There can never be evidence as to whether it deters people.
Well, so it's not a deterrent.
well,
You just said
jail
a minute
is-
ago
is-
it was a deterrent.
I said there can never be evidence. It's a matter of opinion whether it's a deterrent.
Well, do you think it's a deterrent?
I think it's a deterrent.
So you've got
I
no
think-
evidence, but you think it's a deterrent.
I think people would think twice if the death penalty was imposed.
Well, let's ask that Noel McNamara when we come back.
Is jail a deterrent?
It can be in some cases.
Well, why doesn't it work then?
We've got to go to a break, Peter. When we come back, we'll talk to Noel McNamara from the Victims of Crime League in Victoria. We're talking tonight about the death penalty.